Thank you. Thank you. So yes, I'm Sebastiaan DeWith, photographer, designer, and while I like those titles, as a kid I always really wanted to be known as an adventurer. And so now that I've taken control of this whole screen over here, I can put on here whatever I want. So I'm just going to put it right there. Adventure. This looks so good. It sounds so good. Little me would be so stoked about this, by the way. Anyway, I was really, really excited to hear that the theme of this year's TEDx is the roads less traveled, because last year I had a story, or rather an experience of my own, which fits that perfectly. In fact, me and my friend drove a road less traveled, one of the least traveled in the US even. And it's a pretty exhilarating and exciting story too, so I'm excited to get into that. Now this is a story about adversity, and I'm sure everyone here has stories about adversity and stress in their lives. That's pretty much what makes us the people we are today. The funny thing about adversity and stress is that it makes your brain act in a funny way. In fact, when confronted with stress, it tends to de-emphasize creative thought. In fact, it makes a lot of sense, because when we were primitive, and walking around in the jungle, if the predator would come up and attack us, being too creative might harm us. In fact, you would have to fall back on routine and the things you knew and the places you knew, so you wouldn't take unnecessary risks. Now, today, there's not that many sharp-toothed predators in the city and in our lives, and it actually tends to do more harm than good most of the time. I've got an example of my own. I was sitting at work at my desk one day, and it was not a strange desk to me. I'd seen this desk for 3 years. It was the desk I worked at in San Francisco at a company as a designer. Now, being a designer, you have to be creative. I had to output creativity every day, and it was really easy for me. I felt like creativity was that thing you can just sort of draw into in the back of your mind. It was, for lack of a better word, it was an inkwell full of creative juices I could just tap into, and when I would put my pen to the paper, it would just come out. Creativity just happened, so if I had to call on it and say, someone said, oh, draw something random, cat in a flying car, it just, boom, it just came out. It was easy. But that day was different. That day I sat at my desk, and nothing came out. I tapped into that inkwell, and I don't know why, but nothing happened. A slight sort of panic set in, and I was trying it again. I was like, okay, let's try this again. Can I shake myself out of this? It didn't work. Nothing creative happened. The ideas just didn't appear. So for the rest of the day, I decided to do some menial tasks and just find some work that I could do that wasn't creative. And at the end of the day, I sort of looked on myself out of the third person, saw myself sitting at my desk. It was a beautiful Friday evening, 7:30. It was late. Most of the office was empty. And I sat there and I realized that I was making up little tasks for myself to do random things. I didn't want to go home. And it struck me right there and then. I was really deeply depressed. I wasn't happy in my marriage. I wasn't happy in my job. And all creativity had just gone away in my life. And now you're all thinking, dude, you said this was going to be an exciting and happy talk. This is going way downhill ever since you started. It's going to get better. Well, I got divorced and lost my job. But after this, it's going to get better. In fact, you're like, what? What's going on? The solution to all problems, I simply started drinking, right? Any reasonable 20-year-old does that. Not really. Not a good idea. Can't recommend it. In this case, it worked out for me. I guess luck was on my side. In fact, I went to a bar, became a regular, and got to know the bartender there by the name of Stuart Philkill. Stuart and I had a lot in common. He was a couple years older than I was, but he rode motorcycles. I just started riding motorcycles. He liked photography. I liked photography. We started talking a bit whenever I would come to the bar. And every now and then, we'd hang out. We weren't close friends, but we'd hang out every now and then. And so one fateful night, we're sitting on my couch. It was a rainy night out. There's not too many of those. We're drinking whiskey and commiserating. Stuart had quite a couple of setbacks in his life himself. And he suddenly pops this question and says, why don't we ride our motorcycles to Alaska? And for some reason, where normally I would totally take that as a joke, I said, are you serious? It's a pretty big thing to ask. Not only is it a crazy idea, but also we're going to be together a lot. Like, are you really asking me that? That's a pretty serious question. He let it sink in for a couple seconds. He said, yeah, let's do it. And so like no other plan that two guys have ever made while drinking on a late night, a few months later, sure enough, I step outside and the bikes are loaded. There's a guy coming that day to sublet my apartment. There's no way back. And I step out to this view and my brain starts screaming. It says, what is going on? I don't know what's going to happen here. I might die. I don't even know really how big Alaska is. I don't even know where we're going. Just north, I guess. And despite all that, there was no way back. I was so thoroughly out of my comfort zone. But we had to do it now. The ride north, as we called it, had officially begun. And we thought we'd take about 3 months, which we did in the end. It would be about 11,000 miles, a long distance, and we were just going to go north. There was not really a target, just Alaska. So we set off. And that's Stuart in California. We're just looking out over the coast after the first night of traveling up. So we went through California over the coastal roads, avoided the highways, tried to take the scenic route up. We got into Oregon, passed by Crater Lake, really the scenic way up. Lots of different terrains there. And we got into Washington, where people are very curious and a little doe-eyed at times, but they're pretty nice. Very beautiful views there. And soon enough, we were actually sitting on the border of the United States. I mean, California and Northern California are already pretty close to the border of the states. So we looked out over the sound that divides Washington State and Canada, and before we knew it, we were in Vancouver. That would be our last major city on this trip that we visited, the last bastion of civilization. Now, of course, I say civilization, but they're Canadians. They're kind of a strange civilization anyway. We're like, all right, it's kind of enough. Let's just get out of here. And now we're actually on the road less traveled. This road, there's maybe 2 roads that go up towards Alaska from there on out. There's not a lot of people on it. Hey, that's the name of this event. Yes. So we were on there, and it's a very long road. This is thousands of miles. Sometimes it's in good shape. Sometimes it's no more than some rocks, mud, clay. And there's a lot of time to think then. We were alone in this road. And one of the things that struck me most is there is a gradient, a very interesting gradient, that you see in nature and in humanity as you progress towards that really remote, isolated north that gets more and more hostile and crazy as you go up there. For instance, there was this one port town in Alaska where we stopped, where there's a family settled near this port town, which was initially founded by the gold rush pioneers. These were people that arrived there with nothing but everything they owned on their back, searching for riches. And the family that lived there wasn't necessarily looking for riches. They had settled there because they thought it was the most beautiful place on earth. They'd built their own house out of the few cottonwood trees around that they could find. They sustained themselves with everything they could find on the land. They didn't have much, but what they did have was all they got from nature. And they took 2 random travelers like us in and shared with us the little they had, as if that was just the most normal thing in the world. It was very inspiring to me. There was an Austrian man. We met him on a campground in the Arctic when we were way up there. And he'd been traveling the world in his car alone. And I asked him, what are you doing? What are you looking for? And he said, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I think I'll know it when I find it. He had a cat with him called Willie Washington. He'd found it as a very friendly stray cat in Washington State, but demurely had to admit that he had to stop calling him Willie Washington because Americans got very offended that he would name his cat after Washington. Thought it was kind of funny. And lastly, I was in a bar in Alaska and walked out around 4 after a few kind strangers bought us drinks after hearing a story. Walked into the street, a little dazed, and I see a giant grizzly walking down the street, and I'm like trying to bolt back into this bar. And the guys just say, don't worry about it, that's Kevin. He's as much of a local as we are. I said, yeah, sure, Kevin, all right. Yeah. There's a certain quality about the people there, up there in that northern region. And it's not just the people that just live there, but it's the people who pass through or are there for a temporary period of time. I couldn't quite put my finger on what that was until we made a slight change of plans on our trip. You say change of plans, but remember I said we didn't really have that much of a plan. We're going to Alaska. I was like, how big could Alaska be, It's massive. It's a huge place. So we finally made our way up to Fairbanks, not really knowing where to go, because we had no real clear goal. And we saw, sure enough, we were not that far. It was actually about half the length of California away. Not that far from the actual end of the road. There was a road extending from Fairbanks, famous because it was featured in Ice Road Truckers as being one of the most dangerous roads in the United States. But it goes to the Arctic Ocean, the end of the road. If this is going to be a ride north, we could ride as far north as possible. So of course we set upon doing that. Of course we would ride the most dangerous highway in the world. Why not? Well, not in the world, but definitely in the Americas. It seemed like a good idea at the time somehow. This is what the highway looks like. This is it the whole way. And it goes into one of the most hostile biomes on Earth, the Arctic slope. The Arctic slope doesn't grow any trees. There's barely anything alive there. And as you ride there, this is a very mesmerizing experience. Trees start disappearing. What little life falls away at the wayside. It becomes obvious that everything here is a struggle. Humanity struggles to keep their roads intact or even existent. This is called a highway. But somehow we all push ourselves to be there. And I'm just sitting there on my motorcycle going, why? Why are we here? Not me and my friend, not just me and my friend riding this road, but why does a tree push itself to such extreme biomes? Why are we as people trying to live in these extreme places? Why are we as two friends trying to go to such a crazy, dangerous place? And the answer quickly dawned on me. It's what defines us. That tree is defined to its limits of where it grows. It's what defines that organism. Us as humans keep trying to find that frontier, that hard limits to our ability. We can't find it. We even go into space. That's the most hostile environment there is. We, me and my friend, tried to find our limit by going there. In doing so, trying to find ourself. That is a very powerful and inspiring thing. I found it so inspiring that, sometimes, like anyone else, I look at TV and I see one episode of The Jersey Shore and I see some teenagers seeing some really stupid things and I lose faith in humanity. But actually seeing the Arctic, people, everything living there with nature in these incredible places, so ingenious, restored my faith in humanity for years. It's very inspiring stuff. And I found myself there. And while that sounds cliche, think back of that moment where I was so depressed, where my creativity was just gone. It's incredible. Creativity is something that comes natural to us as humans. The moment we're infants and we can hold a pencil, we start drawing with it. It was so key to me to have creativity. For the fact that it was gone meant something really bad had happened with me. And this incredible place started rekindling this in me. It brought it all very much back in me, and it started invigorating me with all this creativity. And to illustrate how it truly came back and how I realized that things had changed, I have to tell you about a really stupid idea we had. It wasn't going the most dangerous highway. I actually managed to one-up that with an even dumber idea. This guy's not very smart. Why is he speaking here? So we tried to go back after that, obviously. We tried to go back home. So we thought we'd ride from Fairbanks to a small port town called Skagway in one day. 700 miles on a partially paved highway at night, 17 hours on a motorcycle, sleep deprivation, bears, bad idea. Everything said bad idea. Of course we did it, because we're stupid. And I crashed. I crashed my bike. I took a turn, and it was big rocks, and it was bad. I was relatively okay. My bike, we had to repair with, we had to cut a branch off a tree, splint it together, safety wire, duct tape. This was my hydraulic system. It was really gnarly. It was, ridiculous. But the moment I came back, and I sat down, and we finished that ride after fixing up the bike, we got to our destination. I was sleep deprived, I was thirsty, I was hungry, I was at the end of my rope. But the first thing I wanted to do is grab my sketchbook and get my ideas that were just overflowing in my mind, get them out. Get these sketches out, these visuals, these ideas, all these things. And one of those sketches actually became the logo of the little one-man design company I made when I got back to San Francisco. These were meaningful ideas. And I realized I got it back, and I realized as much as my bike needs that fuel to go these places, we as people need our creativity to propel us through life, to get through these really adverse situations. It's a very, very remarkable thing that we possess. And while that's a beautiful quote to end it at, that's not where this journey ended. I got home. Me and Stuart are photographers, so we had a lot of photos. I got home and I was like, whoa, these are a lot of photos to go through. But I realized that if I just shared these and threw them online somewhere, or showed them to my friends, they would just be photos. It's like an album of a vacation of sorts. So instead of doing that, I created context. I decided, it was on a Saturday night, I think. I was sitting there, I didn't have much to do. I sat by my computer, entered some little captions for about a selection of 70 images, and then provided the context, which turns an album of photos from just a photo album into an actual story, a story people can relate to. And I said, look, this was my life. I got divorced, I lost my job. This is what we did to fix it. Then I went to bed. And I was like, maybe a couple hundred people will see it. But these were 70 photos. if a photo is not like a cute animated picture of a cat rolling over or a dress that's a certain color nowadays, it just doesn't get shown by anyone. I mean, we don't care, right? So I'm like, yeah, whatever. Maybe a couple hundred motorcycle enthusiasts will be like, yes, cool. The next morning I woke up to millions of views, thousands of comments. My inbox was full of hundreds of things. CNN was on the phone. They wanted to have us on air. They wanted to talk to us. Everybody was commenting about it. And it dawned on me, like, this is cool. 3.25 million views, what? That's cool, but it's just a number. What really blew my mind, and it still happens every week, this happens. And I get a message from someone who says, wow, man, I just saw that thing, or I saw it a while ago, and sometimes when things are bad, I go back and I look at your pictures again, and I realize, hey, I can always go on an adventure like this with my buddy. Or there's tons of them, some more eloquent than others, by the way. There's people saying, like, hey, I never go out. It's fantastic. It was inspiring to me. Hey, I was really down on my luck. You really opened my eyes to this. Yeah, there's some in there. Anyway, the point of all these messages is our path through life and our way of creatively solving things can touch other people's lives in an incredible way. And that spark of creativity can do so much to prevent people from having this stupid thing in their heads that just wants to keep them away from creative solutions to their problems and just tries to keep them down, to break through that and look at possibilities to make their life better, which always gets better. There's always a creative way out. So I guess the moral of the story is, when faced with adversity, travel that road less traveled, and don't forget to show others the way. Thank you.